you get through. You know that the roller coaster ride of life, you just keep going. When things get tough, you just keep going. You just keep getting up and doing what you have to do and waiting, because at some point it all sort of calms down again. I'm not sure when, but you just keep going.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. One of the defining features of the hospitality landscape in recent years is the boom of great eateries in the suburbs. Career professionals that have made their mark in the city, taking their skills and energy to smaller communities and raising the level of everyday eats. With lockdowns forcing us back to our communities, what has been the impact on establishments reliant on these local customers? Susan Sullivan is the co-owner of Boronia Kitchen in the Sydney suburb of Gladesville. Susan, how are you going?
Pretty well. Anthony, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us. We've got a lot to talk about. What's it been like the last couple of months in Gladesville, trying to run a local restaurant with everything that's been going on with the pandemic?
Well, it's certainly been challenging. I don't think anyone, I would have believed anyone if they had have told me 12 months ago that, in March 2020 you'd have to close your restaurant, because the government told you to because of the pandemic. I don't think anyone would have ever expected that could have happened. There was always this understanding, people will always eat out, you'll always get a job in a restaurant. So I think for the impact to come on the hospitality industry, I think it's been huge. I don't think anyone, like I said, when it's so unexpected, I think it's certainly rocked a few people's world, that's for sure. The suburbs, I think, have been a little bit protected in a sense. I must admit, I'm glad I don't have a restaurant in the city at the moment. The suburbs are easier because everyone's gone back home, and even when we started, I think people were really grateful to have a nice, quality suburban restaurant. People liked to drop in, and even when, we haven't been open that long. We were only open about, I think we turned 2. It was our second birthday just in the week or two after we opened, after the shutdown. And, a lot of people were really grateful that we'd come into the suburbs. So, it's certainly been an interesting couple of months, that's for sure.
Before we talk about that sort of impact and what you've done to adapt and change, can you tell us why Boronia Kitchen in Gladesville? I know you're working with Simon Sandel, and you have a sort of a long working relationship from the Morsel Group and with the various restaurants that were in that. Can you tell us why Gladesville and sort of what you created there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I left Morsel must be going on 5 years ago now, and that was big. At that time, we had 8 restaurants. And growing even bigger, So it was time. After that, I think I was working with Matt and Pete for 23, 24 years or something, 20-something years.
Wow.
And I just decided it was time. It was time for a change. It was just, there's just a point where you suddenly go, right, I think it's time for me to leave. And then I took maybe 6 months off. But I'd always worked, even if, we always laughed about the fact 5 days after I had all of my children, I'd always be back doing the pays or something. So I'd always worked, always. My life, whether it was work from home or something, work was part of me. So, I enjoyed not working for a while, and then I sort of had to stop and think, what's next? What am I going to do? And then we did some consultancy. I did some consultancy. I think by the time I chatted to Simon, he'd already left Morsel as well. And it was after Pete had left and Simon had left and a few people had left, and Jane had done the HR, and, we'd worked together for a long time, so we got on really well. And we decided we would start a consultancy company, which we did. And we still do. We still do consultancy now called Vandal & Co. And it's nice to have a base. I think we always looked for sites. There were a couple of sites. Actually we look back on now and think, glad we didn't do that one. So certainly after Pete left, we did keep looking for sites. But I think after you've done it for such a long time, you sort of know which ones might work and which ones won't. But we were looking for a base, really. We were looking to start a restaurant. Simon found a site. Simon rang me. I think Pete and I were away at the time. And he said, I found a site. I think it'd be really good. It's around the corner from my place, blah, blah, blah. It's suburban. But it had all the things that we knew tick the boxes. It was an institute. It was an iconic site in the suburbs. So it had been called Il Bolognese. It had been there for like 35 years. So people already knew it from where it is. It had parking. It had, it had good visual from the street. It just ticked all the boxes that we wanted. The rent was okay, so we started it, and it just started from there. And it's been great. It has been, and there's people that just sort of look and go, why would you go from what you were doing to, one small little suburban restaurant? But I don't know, I loved it. I have a very different role to what I did have. Obviously in Morsel, I was certainly all back of house. I was admin, I was sort of general manager, I was HR, I was marketing, I was always in the office. I was certainly not anywhere near the floor. But I would often sit in all the, and if I go back years, then I worked on the floor, but it had been a long time. So when I first opened it, I found it really hard to find a restaurant manager. We were in the suburbs and we were only new and it was small, and I was like, what am I going to do? And I started working on the floor, and I actually loved it. I really enjoyed it, and it had that adrenaline that everyone, gets when they work in the hospitality industry, and it sort of started from there. So,
what are some of the differences of opening a restaurant in the suburb and the way that you feel on the floor compared to, these big CBD restaurants that you're involved with, like Aria and stuff from your past?
I think it's a little bit easier. I think, dare I say, the people are a little bit nicer. Certainly our customers are lovely. Like, I think they're really, it's a bit like sometimes I often feel, especially after we've been there now for 2 years, I feel like people are walking into my own lounge room. You get to know, we've got a lot of regulars, we've got a lot of locals. There are people that come from the eastern suburbs and they come from the beaches and all over, they do, but most of it, our core group is our locals. And we know everyone, and they're not stressed. They're not. Maybe their expectations are lower, so it's easier to give them what they're looking for. But it just feels that people are a little bit nicer, dare I say, if I'm allowed to say that. I think in the city, it's certainly places like Aria, and the expectations are really high. It's really hard to, it's not hard. I know even now, Aria, they do it really well. And the guys then did it really well. But running restaurants is hard no matter where you are. But I think in the suburbs, there's just a little bit more, maybe a little lower expectations. So I don't think there should be. And we never set our expectations any lower, and maybe that's why it's been so wonderful for us, because I still set the expectations, and I know Simon sets it, even higher. And the food he's doing is fabulous. You can get that in any city restaurant. It shouldn't make any difference whether you're in the city or you're in the suburbs. People still want to come in and they want to have a great experience, and that's what hopefully we provide them each time they come.
You mentioned that perhaps people's expectations aren't as high from you guys, but a suburban restaurant like yours, what sort of role does it play in the community? Do you feel an obligation to provide and become a hub of the community? Is it quite a different model in that respect?
I think you couldn't be a restaurant in the suburbs without realising the importance of the locals. And you are a hub, and we decided we'd open breakfast, lunch and dinner, which I'm not sure really why we decided to do that, but it was crazy. It was crazy at the time, but you do have to make all the numbers add up, and you've got to work out how much rent you've got to pay, but I think it's actually worked to our advantage. When we decided to do breakfast, lunch and dinner, we went, okay, but how do you, and it hasn't been done very often, in the sense that somewhere you go and pick up your coffee, or somewhere you might, drop in and have your bacon and egg roll. Do you really want to go back there and have what you would call quite a, serious dinner? So we really worked on, okay, so what do you need for breakfast? And we sort of tried to get that right. And then we morphed it slowly. So, for dinner, you would take the sugars off the table and you'd put the candles on. The staff would take, maybe their T-shirts off that was a bit more casual, and they'd put on their white collared shirts. And the nuances for each we tried to make each service a little bit different, and you changed it up a bit. And people did. People, we sometimes laugh. There are people who have, the mum will come in the morning and pick up her coffee and have a muffin with the kids for breakfast before she drops them off to school, and then she'll meet a girlfriend there for lunch, and she'll come back in later with, a group of friends for dinner. It does happen. And so I think you do become a hub. You become part of the community, but you have to. It's a big part of, who we are and what we do. We are community-based, definitely, 100%. Without the community, without the locals, we wouldn't have a restaurant.
A little earlier you said that when the pandemic sort of happened and you were forced to close the doors, that was around about the 2-year mark of the restaurant. Can you tell us what the impact was initially on the restaurant, and then how you adapted those next couple of weeks?
Yeah, well, it was sort of, as it was happening and as we were hearing about it from a lot of people, we were, if anything, getting busier because everyone was working from home. So when it first started, sort of early March, we were really busy. And so we were a bit like, wow, what's happening here? So the problem came in for us when the social distancing started, and when the government started I think it started off at 4 per square metre, and we had to limit the number of people. That really, because we're only a small, space, it's not that big. So that, and we were tight. We had tables, fairly close to each other. That was part of the buzz of the restaurant. To take the tables out and to reduce our numbers, that's when it really started hurting, because we were based on volume. So you couldn't do it. I remember very clearly the Friday night it came on. It was like Friday at midnight. So we were okay for the Friday night. But then the Saturday night we had to reduce the numbers, and we couldn't fit everyone in. And by the Sunday, I think on the Saturday, I sat down and I did all the figures, and I went, Simon and I met on Sunday morning and went, wow, this, if we have to maintain this level, we're actually better off to close, because the rent we were paying out, everything, the staff costs that we were carrying, it wasn't viable. It wasn't viable to stay open on the numbers that they were saying we had to do. And we had takeaway too. See, we were lucky in the sense that we already had our takeaway. It was already established. We already had everything set up. We had all the systems. But I also did the numbers on just doing takeaway if the restaurant had to close. And that definitely didn't work, because you needed each element. You need to have the restaurant working at full capacity for the takeaway to be viable. And then the catering, we did a lot of home catering, so that was all set up as well. But you needed to have each of the elements for it all to work. They didn't work independently. So we closed, and we closed on that Sunday. I don't think it was surreal. It was really odd. We pulled all the stuff in and said, look, we're going to have to close, guys. We will do our best. We didn't, I think most people know, we didn't have any idea that JobKeeper was going to exist at this stage. And Simon and I sat down and went, what do we do? Do we even have enough to pay everyone their annual leave? Because obviously the first thing they're going to do is go on to annual leave so we can all work out what the hell was going on. And luckily we did. We had, timing is everything. And if it had happened 12 months before, even 6 months before, I think it would have been very different for us, because your first year or your first 18 months of operation is hard. But, we had sort of solidified a few things being just about into our second year. So, yeah, we were okay. We knew we were going to do it. And then obviously JobKeeper came in. So once we got JobKeeper, once again, I sat down and did the figures all over, and I went, right, we can open for takeaway because we had the JobKeeper. And then slowly we opened when we could do 10 people, and then we slowly opened when we could do 20, and, got back to where we are now, which is still we're still 40% down on our numbers. Our numbers of patrons we can take in, of covers. But I think, as a lot of people have said, we changed our model a little bit, and we've got a 2-course, 3-course menu price, still full a la carte, but a menu price. So we're not down as much as you would think, given the numbers are down, if you know what I mean. So But yes, where it goes next, I think, is where everyone's sitting here going, shut down, open, shut down, open. I don't think that's something that any of us really want to get into, because that's where it's going to get really hard.
With the altered offering that you were delivering in the market, or you still are delivering to the market, how important has the local community been, and what's the response been to this different menu setup and also the takeaway offering?
Well, the takeaway, a lot of people were very surprised. A lot of people, when we closed, were like, well, why? Why are you closing? Like, you do takeaway. Why can't we come and get our, rotisserie chicken that they love so much? Or, like, you do takeaway. And to try and make them understand that it just wasn't viable, we'd get a lot of messages, and it's like, well, we can't. We got a lot of love from the community, and I think that was a really wonderful thing that came out of this. We got a lot of, we want you guys to come back. We're here to support you. We love having you in our neighbourhood, so we want to do whatever we can. So when we first reopened for takeaway, we were really busy, really busy. And then the takeaway has sort of dropped back probably to what it was pre-COVID, which was still good, but, it's the model has almost gone back to what it was. But the community supported us 100%. They came back. They sent us messages of support. They really have supported us, and with very little pushback, I think, for the 2-course, 3-course. They were okay with that. It wasn't hugely different. There's only a lot of people might have only come in, and had 2 courses anyway. So it's worked well for us. It has worked well. I can't say that it wasn't difficult at times, but it certainly now is okay because of that community support that we've got, definitely.
How have you felt during this time? You've got a long, illustrious career in the industry, and you've seen some tough times previously, but how are you feeling through this process?
It's hard. It's hard. And you know what? It's hard. 2 of my kids were and still are living in New York. That's hard. They're a really long way away. My youngest is, completing her nursing degree and working in an aged care facility at the moment. That's hard. I don't think anyone ever thought that, like I said before, hospitality could be, it was almost like hospitality was bulletproof. And I think we found out it's certainly not bulletproof. So, look, I don't know. I feel incredibly fortunate. It has been a long career, and there have been times that were really hard. But I don't know. You get through. You know that the roller coaster ride of life. You just keep going. When things get tough, you just keep going. You just keep getting up and doing what you have to do and waiting, because at some point it all sort of calms down again. I'm not sure when, but you just keep going.
With restrictions in place on restaurants, and we hear of different establishments not abiding by restrictions, and people sort of not abiding by the rules as well, what's it been like to manage that as a restaurant owner in your own venue?
It's really interesting, that one. Really interesting. And I guess it comes down a little bit, certainly my personality has always been to always do the right thing, and so we have absolutely done, I think the measuring tape is my friend more now than anything else. We get up because you lose the flexibility. We've lost the ability when someone rings up to go, oh, we need a table of 2. It's like, well, I just can't, I can't go over my numbers. I can't squeeze another table in. I can't. And that's hard, I think, for hospitality is about saying yes. It's about looking after people. It's about doing everything you can for people. We can't do that anymore, so that's been difficult. We've had to, obviously, I think cleaning, we did that anyway. We always joked, all of us wash our hands, 10 times a day anyway. So we certainly have upped it. We've got, sanitizer everywhere, and we've got the tables spaced. What we're finding from people is that they're really appreciative of that. There are a lot of restaurants, certainly in the suburbs, certainly saying, look, I've got to make hay while the sun shines. I can't be turning people away. I have to, I need to make up for the money I lost while we were closed. I feel like it's a very short-term view, because a lot of people come into us and say, wow, it's so nice that you're doing everything properly, because it means they trust us. It means that, it means they're going to come back. And they're often people are saying to me, wow, we just feel comfortable coming here because we know that you're doing the right thing, and that's why I just think it has to be done. We all have to play the part, of what it's going to take to do whatever it takes to get rid of this or to move to the next step. Or I just don't think it's worth the risk. I watch the news and I see all these things come up, and I think there would be nothing worse than your venue coming up on that list of if you've been here, you could have. But at the same time, I feel like even though we're doing everything that we can, we have the sanitizer when you walk in, we clean everything, we're socially distanced, we're doing everything. I don't know. Is that going to be enough? I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so, because I just think that would be a horrible thing to have to happen. If someone came in who was, and you do, there's people who are still going out when they feel sick and still, thinking, oh, it'll be fine, and that's where it gets a little bit tough, because it's out of our control. We can't control everything, and that's where it gets a little bit difficult, because I think it'd be nice to be able to know that because we're doing everything right, everything will be okay.
A little earlier you mentioned that it's 40% down on normal trade, and obviously there's restrictions on restaurants with social distancing at the moment. What's the reality moving forward, do you think, for the industry with these restrictions in place, if they're continuing and continually have to sort of abide by these restrictions?
We changed with, like I said before, going to the set price menu, which has meant that even though we're down on numbers, we're not down hugely on takings. When it's not winter time, and when we get into that sort of, summer, spring, much warmer days, we've got quite a big outside area we can use. So for us personally, I think it'll be okay. I think it'll almost be, it's weird now, you see something, you're even, you're watching TV or something and you see people really close together and you think, oh, it feels odd. I think the social distancing is around for a while. I really do. I think people have got very used to it. I think people really like it. I don't think people like being, squished in and so intimate with the people next to them. So I think it's around for a while. And I think restaurants are just going to have to somehow find ways of working around it. But like I said, because we've got such community support, people have been okay with it. People have been, sure. I'm not saying everyone. There are people who walk in and go, well, why can't I just have a main course now? And I'm like, well, because, we've got such few numbers and, it's what we need to do to keep viable, to keep operating. It's just what we have to do. And I think most people are most restaurateurs are going to have to work with the social distancing, and most customers are going to have to realise that there's a price they're going to have to pay for it, it's just the way it has to be, unless they don't want their restaurants opening again, or continuing, should I say. If they don't want their restaurants lasting, maybe they can complain. But so far, touch wood, we've been really lucky. Everyone's been really supportive with the changes we've made.
Do you think the pandemic will influence how restaurants will be designed in the future?
I hope not. I think that maybe we will. I think it's going to take a long time to get through it. But I think restaurants are just, they are what they are. There are nights when, depending on who's in and what sort of customers, and if you get too many twos, there can be a real lack of energy in the room. Part of coming to a really vibrant, buzzy restaurant was part of the fun. Do you know what I mean? So I hope it doesn't get to the point where, it's all sterile and far apart. And, like I said, when our tables were quite close together, I would see even the connection, people, and because we're local, people would come in and they'd all know each other, and that table of two would be sat next to each other, and then in the end they'd end up putting their tables together and they'd have a table of four. So I think it's part of going out. So I hope not. I do. We did change. One thing we did do, I've got a a wonderful stylist that I used for the restaurant, and I said to her, right, we've got the booths, which I need barriers. I need barriers between them because otherwise I can't use them. I said, but I don't want it to be plastic and I don't want it to look horrible. And so she came up with these beautiful stained glass windows that she reconditioned and put in as barriers.
Wow.
And it almost looks like they should have been there in the beginning. So I think there are some design things that certainly improve the restaurant because it does allow you a little bit of privacy without really separating everyone. But yeah, I hope the design doesn't get impacted by the pandemic. I certainly hope not.
A little earlier on, you mentioned about how just before the pandemic, you actually had an increase in business because people were back in their communities, with a lot of people questioning whether they need to be in the office moving forward at all or part-time. Do you think that we're going to see a bit of a boom in the sort of community local restaurants moving forward?
I think so, and that's only from anecdotally. I get a lot of customers who, whether they pop in for their takeaway coffee or whether they pop in for lunch, there just feels like people aren't rushing back. People are sitting there going, well, I get an extra 2 hours a day. My commute was 45 minutes or 50 minutes or something on the way there, and it was the same on the way back. No one wants to lose that time back to sitting in a car or sitting on a train. So we get a lot of people who are not rushing back to the office. We're probably the little bit older demographic as well, sort of, even if it's sort of 30 plus, they know that they're home and their kids get home, they've got more time on their hands. Don't get me wrong, there are some people who are like, God, I can't wait to get back into the office. And I think, if any of us have to do any of those horrible Zoom meetings ever again, they're just, they're horrible. They're just horrible. Yeah. But I do think the commute to the office, I don't think I find it hard to think that it'll ever get back to Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I'm just not sure. It's maybe people go in 2 or 3 days a week, maybe they change things around a bit. But from what I can tell, anecdotally from my customers, they're all happy to stay home. And therefore, yes, I think that, there will be a growth of decent suburban restaurants because, I guess restaurants go where the demand is, or you just have to. You have to follow where the demand is. So I think the suburbs are certainly going to be strong for a while. And even the regional, I think regionally, New South Wales, and I know a few people in regional restaurants, they're doing really well, like they never have before. And hopefully that stays. Hopefully, people do pop out for a weekend or they do realise that it's not very far to go down to Barrel or pop up to somewhere, the mountains or whatever. So I think, yes, I think so. I think restaurants will spread out a little bit more, definitely, than just being centralised in the city.
A little earlier you mentioned, the stresses of having, your children in New York or working in professions, that's sort of on the front line and at higher risk. How have you dealt with the stresses and anxiety of that during this time?
We FaceTime a lot. FaceTime is fabulous. I've probably had more FaceTime conversations with my children in the last, 3 months than certainly the last year or 2 years when they've been in New York because they're not working. They're sensible. I'm not. There's very little I can do about it. So I sort of, you do worry. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you think, wow, they're such a long way away. But I trust them. I trust that they know what they're doing. They're quite strong and resilient people, which I think comes from the industries that they were raised in. So yeah, I just keep often taking one day at a time. I think the fact that obviously I did have a trip to New York planned. Pete was going to be there for 6 months over the summer, 6 weeks, over the summer. That's hard, that. For me personally, I've always been able to work really hard, but my breaks, my getting on a plane or my getting away has been really important to me. So that's hard. That is something that you sit and go, wow. And so for a little while when it first started, I was like, oh, how am I going to do this? But I think you just sort of get used to it. You're just playing a waiting game, I think, Life will come back to normal one day. We just have to wait for that as patiently as we can.
You've always been the backbone of restaurants, especially with Morsel and Matt Moran and Peter Sullivan was sort of the face of the business. But you sort of mentioned how you loved being in the front of house again with Boronia. And what is it that you love about restaurants and being in a restaurant?
I love being in the front of house in the sense of the connection with the customers. I'm not great with the public side of it. I never would want or need that part of it, certainly. So I just think it's the connection with people. I really find that we've got some really lovely customers, and it's just nice to get that connection and that interaction with people. I think it's what is often missing, and I've always found connection with people really important to me. But I guess in the Morsel group, I had it more with the staff, and I would have a lot of connection with the staff as opposed to the customers. So as long as you get that human interaction, I think it's an important part of what we as humans need. I think that that is what would be a terrible loss and I think that's, as society, if we do spend too much time on our phones and this, it's very cliched, but I think people need that human interaction and that connection with people, and it's just nice. It's nice to see people walk in and people are in good moods and they're happy to come and join you, and they're all celebrating all there. So it just gives you a good feeling. It really does, So I was quite surprised how much I enjoyed working on the floor, definitely.
Well, Boronia Kitchen, it has become a hub of the community in Gladesville. What are you most looking forward to in the future as we sort of move forward beyond COVID?
Apart from a 2-week trip to New York at some point post-COVID, then I think longevity is important. I think, and I'm really settled and really happy. I'm not looking. I mean, obviously, I'm at a different stage in my life. I'd be happy just to keep, working at Boronia. It's a wonderful place. It's warm. I mean, we are looking at next door. We have the office and we run the consultancy, and we have the prep kitchen and wine store and stuff. We are going to put in a small function room, which was always part of the plan. It's like 2 old houses next door to each other. That would certainly be the next step, because I think we've time and time again proven that functions are a very important part of a restaurant's business. Private dining rooms, people want to be in groups. That obviously is going to change. At the moment we can only do 10 people, so it'll be a while before we can get back to, normal 40th and 50th and celebrations. But certainly that is the next step. I think developing it takes a long time to, fully develop a restaurant. We developed the takeaway in the when we were closed. That certainly got the attention it maybe needed that it didn't have when we were opening the restaurant. So that's pretty strong now. The home catering is great. People love the fact that they can come in and get something for 6 people or 12 people, or people coming over for dinner and stuff like that. So that works well. I mean, I think Simon and I, between us, especially Simon's career has been very varied. I know Simon and I first worked together at, obviously, Aria, where he was head chef. But then he and I both sort of moved over across to Aria Catering. And so we did a lot of the catering side of it, which was really allowed us to, which is very different, quite different to running a restaurant. So I feel very fortunate that we've got a skill set that has a lot of variation to it, and I trust Simon implicitly in the sense of he's an incredibly organised chef. I know that whatever needs to be done, he will have an organised brain to be able to work out exactly how it needs to be done. And he's got the skill to be able to provide the level of quality in the food that people are looking for, but at a good price. So I think just, what's the word for it? Perhaps just solidifying, just, continuing to grow and just changing. You're always changing in a restaurant. We change the restaurants. We change the menu 4 or 5 times a year. We have specials on the menu because you have to, because if you have regulars coming in once a week, if for 4 weeks, they're going to be sick of that menu. So you have to have specials. So we're continually, or Simon is certainly continually creating dishes, for specials. So it's enough, I think. It's more than enough to keep us busy for quite a while.
Well, Susan, I know you're not one to seek the limelight.
No, definitely not.
Well, we're truly honoured for you to share your story with us today. It's been extraordinary. Please keep in touch. It's been amazing talking to you today, and thanks for being on Deep in the Weeds.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Anthony. Appreciate it.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.